Chapter 5 Gaster. The door to the ruins grinded shut, as Frisk stepped out onto that path flanked by trees like sentinels, their shadows cross-hatching the snow. He held one arm up against the sudden glare. He still smelled a little bit like pie crust and clean linen. The conversation with Flowey had gone as usual. Despite his confidence in Waterfall, he hadn't remembered a thing. After his vision had adjusted, he lowered his arm and started to walk.
Hey.
Frisk yelped and spun on his heel. Sans was there, leaning up against the wall beside the ruin's entrance, flipping through a small memo pad propped in one bony palm. He looked up at Frisk and winked.
Yep, it's you all right. Figured we could change things up a little bit this time, considering.
He stuck the pad in his hoodie pocket, straightened, stretched.
Had a real good gag planned. Whoopee cushions were involved. They're always funny. But I get the feeling you've seen that one before. Here, take it as a souvenir.
He fished through the pockets on his jacket, then his shorts, and then the expression in his eyes turned puzzled.
Huh. Did I drop it? That's weird.
Then he brightened up.
That's good. Weird's good. We want weird today. Come on, kid, walk and talk with me. Or, you'll walk and I'll talk.
He set off down the forest path. After a moment, Frisk followed.
I'd take a shortcut, but everything's so snarled right now I couldn't be sure where we'd end up. Careful, don't trip.
He took Frisk's hand, helped him over the fallen branch.
I don't know what you did in that last loop, kiddo, but when I went through my notes, I had asymptotes popping off my readings like line dancers. I've never seen curves like that before, and that's not hyperbola. He glanced down, noticed Frisk's completely blank expression. Yeah, definitely the wrong crowd for that one. I'm just feeling nostalgic.
They stepped through Papyrus's comically ineffective gate, across the narrow bridge. Ahead was the clearing with the conveniently shaped lamp, for hiding Frisk, and Sans' conveniently shaped guard post, for hiding condiments.
Anyway, that irregularity was like a jigsaw piece falling into place. Everything clicked at once. It felt almost too perfect, honestly, but this is fuzzy math at the best of times. Whoops, stay sharp. Here comes my brother. Sup, bro?
Papyrus stormed in their direction like a lanky whirlwind. His elbows and knees waved about at velocities that would probably decapitated anyone nearby.
You know what's up, brother. It's been 8 days and you still haven't...
He skidded to a halt and his sockets went wide.
Oh my god, is that a human?
Sans kept walking.
Nah.
Oh, okay. Introduce us later.
Sure thing. Just stick around here, alright?
Frisk waved. Papyrus waved back, with both arms.
I figure we could double back after all this is done and get events on course. Papyrus is a good sport. He'll be here. No one else ought to bug us while I'm with you.
They continued past the box lover's sign, avoided the world's saddest pickup note, stepped onto the path where Doggo kept watch. On cue, Doggo's snout emerged from his guard post like a slightly damp sunrise, followed by the gleam of his knives.
Did something move? Was it my... Oh, hey, Sans. Who's your friend?
Just a friend. You got cards with everyone today?
Same as every day, yeah.
Tell Greater Dog that I'll toss a few bones his way if he goes easy on you.
Aha, that's a funny joke, Doggo said darkly. Frisk waved. Doggo waved at where he'd been a second ago, then dipped back below the sill.
We got a lot of ground to cover, Sans said, so I'll fill you in on the details. Yeah, let's step around the ice.
They walked around the slippery patch ahead.
The guy we're going to see is named Dr. W.D. Gaster. He's... Hey, where are you going? It's this way.
Frisk had stepped away from Sans and had headed up the northern path. He held up a finger. Just a minute. Sans watched as he disappeared into the thicket. After a little while, he emerged again, cradling a small lump of snowman in his hands.
All good?
Frisk put the snowman away and nodded.
All right, like I was saying, Dr. Gaster. He was the royal scientist before Alphys got the job. Short version is he's kinda tough to find nowadays, but I'm feeling chatty, so we'll give you the long version too.
Papyrus hadn't reset his puzzles yet, so the way forward was clear. Snow crystals sparkled in the dark skies. The wind blew in irregular patterns. It sometimes felt as though the currents carried the breeze in many directions at once.
Now, Gaster's brilliance was unmatched in the underground. Guy had a mind like no other, and a list of inventions longer than Lesser Dog's neck on a good day. He built the core, from scratch, just to find a way to burst apart the barrier without, harvesting human souls, since Asgore was getting kinda bunged out with that whole plan. He and his team ran a bunch of early tests on the human souls to get a feel for things and eventually... What, again?
Frisk had wandered off to the ice cream salesman, who was sitting gloomily next to his cart. Sans watched Frisk hold up 2 fingers, saw the salesman perk up, then chuckled to himself and stared down the path. A minute later, he heard crunching footsteps and looked back down to see Frisk holding up 2 wrapped ice cream bars. "You know, kid, we are sort of on a schedule here." Frisk tilted his head. Forget it, there's always time for ice cream." He took one of the ice creams and pulled off the wrapper, then read the message inside. "Have a wonderful day."
"Sure, I'll try. What's yours say?"
Frisk held up an illustration of a hug.
Awesome.
They ate in silence, walking down the plateau. As Frisk licked his stick clean, he idly kicked a snowball down the snowy field. It ricocheted at odd angles, bounced a few times, appeared to somehow roll backward, and after a few more kicks, fell into a hole at the end of the path. A red flag popped up as the 2 of them continued on. Sans tossed away the stick and resumed talking.
"So, Gaster ran a few early experiments on the nature of soul energy. Alphys would pick up where that left off, but it barely took him any time at all to get a rough handle on how determination worked. I'm assuming you saw the outcome of that little nasty business, right?"
Frisk nodded. The rusted hulk of the DT extractor loomed in both their minds.
"But then he saw something else. Bizarre readings on his instruments or something, I don't know. No one ever really had the clearest idea how his mind worked. Guy could think his way through a corkscrew without touching the sides, you get me?"
He looked at Frisk.
"You don't get me. That's fine. Point is, the focus of his research changed. His reports showed a massive anomaly in the time-space continuum. Timelines jumping left and right, starting and stopping, until suddenly everything ends."
After a moment, Sans realized that he was suddenly walking alone. He turned around and saw Frisk standing in place, staring up at him. His bony brow crinkled.
"That look on your face. You've heard this part before."
Frisk nodded slowly.
"Yeah, it was like a hole in the bottom of the glass. Every point of time getting pulled down to the same place and then, poof, darkness. You could probably see why the doctor would have thought this was a little more concerning than the barrier. So he set up an observation lab."
Sans looked away. The lights in his eyes flickered.
"A place where he could locate the anomaly and eliminate it."
He turned on his heel and started moving again. Eventually, Frisk followed him.
"Didn't work, of course," he said casually. "Gaster was a genius, but he kinda bit off more than he could chew. Job went on so long, all his assistants packed up and went looking for better hours. As for Gaster, he—"
Frisk yanked on his sleeve.
"Whoa, what is it?"
Frisk glared.
"That's one accusing look you got there, buddy. Was it something I said?"
The glare somehow intensified. Sans stared him down for as long as he could. He didn't have to blink, but then Frisk's eyes were so heavy-lidded it was usually impossible to tell if he was blinking anyway. They were standing near a mouse hole, and the mouse's timid squeak filled the silence between them. The lights of Sans' pupils wavered and went dark. He pulled away from Frisk and stared off into the woods.
"Guess you've gotten pretty good at picking up on little white lies, huh?"
He scraped one hand across the top of his skull.
"They all died," he said quietly. "Everyone on Gaster's original team, including the doc himself. I'm the only one left."
The breeze picked up. Evergreens rattled like bones.
"Took us a while to even figure out what was going on. Maybe that's partly why it got as bad as it did. Someone would get caught in a dark room, or turn a corner, or get out of bed a little late, and all you'd find was a pile of dust."
He stared at his slippers.
"I guess the anomaly didn't appreciate us messing around with it." "The doc spent all that effort building a window to see through time, and then forgot to make it one-way glass. He always did have trouble finishing things."
He turned back to Frisk. His grin was as rigid as ever, but the bone around his sockets had drooped so deep that his eyes had turned into crescents. His pupils blinked back on like faulty light bulbs.
"Gaster was the last to go. Couldn't even collect his remains. The dust fell through the floor, right into the heart of the core. I got a little emotional. Smashed his equipment. After that, the anomaly stopped bothering us. I quit, and Alphys eventually had the lucky privilege of taking over his job. She even managed to figure out a couple of his blueprints. She's a smart girl, but the doctor... no one could ever replace him." He shrugged. "Sorry, kid. Didn't mean to sugarcoat it. Old habits."
Frisk chewed his lip, traced abstract shapes in the snow with the tip of his shoe. Then he gestured down the path. Sans took the hint and resumed walking.
It was a bad time for everyone, you know? The anomaly, whatever it did, it hit hard. It seemed to take away a lot more than just their lives. Hardly anyone even remembers the old team these days, and that goes double for Gaster. Alphys doesn't know him, and she practically interned with him. Even Papyrus doesn't... Well, it just got me down for a while. He sighed. Full disclosure, I kinda looked up to the guy.
Frisk heard something behind him, a distant buzz like a phone with no signal. He looked back, but nothing was there.
But that's the thing. Seems like not even getting killed stopped him. I can't totally understand it, but he's in a lot of places now, a lot of times, all at once. Maybe it was because his essence fell into the core, or maybe he was just that determined to survive. The guy definitely spent a lot of time around human souls. Your kind might have rubbed off on him.
They walked across Alphys's disabled tile puzzle, every square fallen silent and gray.
I was looking for those echoes of him, hoping your reset shenanigans would eventually stir things up enough to lead me to the source, where Dr. Gaster really was. And like I told you on the phone, I found him.
They passed Lesser Dog's house. He hadn't yet gone out on patrol, and doggy snores sounded from the darkness within. With every snore, Frisk could see a wet black nose pop in and out of the house. Apparently, he was dreaming of being pet.
It's like trying to solve a word search. One that's 1 billion letters wide and 1 billion letters long. You can't hope to find the word you want in that mess if you look everywhere at once. So instead you focus on one little part and hope you'll sniff it out. You keep rearranging things with every reset until I found the word. The path where everything converges. And it's not much farther now.
Sans turned and started walking backwards, his grin wider than usual.
Should have figured it'd be here. We got strange signals crawling on this part of the underground like auroras, bizarre phone calls, tingling feelings on the back of your neck. And now we'll finally get to meet the real Dr. Gaster. If anyone can help bail out your fuzzy little buddy, it's him. And hey, as a special thank you to the doctor afterward, what do you say we save him too?
They'd reached the icy patch containing Papyrus's final switch puzzle. Sans stepped on the ice and pushed off, sliding into the dark tunnel beyond.
That nice cream wrapper had the right idea, kiddo. It's gonna be a wonderful day.
Frisk stood and watched him disappear, then tiptoed on the ice, pushed off, and followed. They both emerged on the other side with snow puffs on top of their heads. Sans chuckled again and swiped his off.
Man, where do these things come from? Hold still, kid, you got a little puff problem up top.
He knocked the snow off Frisk's head, then gave his hair a quick rustle to shake out the rest. Frisk stood rigid with his hands at his sides. He wouldn't look at Sans anymore. An awkward silence ensued.
Sans cleared his throat and pointed the way down the mountain. It's this way. Watch your step.
They started downhill.
So, how are you holding up? You look kinda beat.
I'm fine.
Wow. Wasn't expecting you to answer.
He looked back at Frisk.
You find anything interesting on your end? Any ways of helping Azrael?
I tried some things. They didn't work. Frisk trudged through the snow. He got really mad. Sans's expression turned concerned. Then he looked back at the path and kept moving.
Well, shut up. That's what you've got me for, right? You just have to stay determined.
They turned and walked along the cliff face where ghostly orbs glimmered through cracks in the stone. It was hard to tell whether they were eyes or merely tricks of the light, but either way they watched with curiosity at these two travelers. They continued to watch as Frisk stopped walking, leaving Sans to once again figure out that the number of footsteps he was hearing had decreased by half. He stopped and turned around.
What's wrong now? You tired? It's only a couple more minutes.
Frisk shivered in place with his arms wrapped around him, a single splotch of color in the white expanse. His tangled mess of hair barely responded to the wind. When he spoke, Sans had to lean in and catch the words. Can I ask you something? Something in his voice compelled Sans to lay off the jokes.
Yeah, of course.
Frisk's jaw moved as though he was chewing on the words, trying to force them into the right shape to leave his mouth. Finally, he looked up. The black lines of eyelashes were rimmed with frost. Sans, am I a bad person? Sans' smile flickered. For a moment he appeared to be anticipating a punchline, but Frisk remained quiet after that, his gaze unwavering. Sans nervously fidgeted in the snow.
Okay. That is a question you just asked, alright? I mean, we technically just met and all, but I got a reasonably solid mountain of evidence that says you're pretty darn nice. Plus the fact that you bought me ice cream like 15 minutes ago, so that's neat.
He scratched the back of his skull.
Kid, why would you even think that?
Frisk shrugged helplessly. Because I'm hurting people. His voice started to shake. I mean, I try to help everyone, but then I just take it all back every time. And Azrael doesn't want me around anymore, but I keep trying anyway. Now it was cracking like ice. And because of me, all your friends,
No.
Sans practically warped in front of Frisk, beads of perspiration improbably popping out of his brow.
I didn't mean it like that, kid. That wasn't your fault.
But you said that.
I know what I said. I said it in a stupid way. Joke's on me. Frisk, seriously, look at me.
Sans palmed the top of Frisk's head like a basketball and turned it upwards.
Look at his handsome face. I saw what took out Gaster and the others, or at least I think I did, and it wasn't you, okay? You're scrambling time like an egg. Yeah, fair enough, point made, but that thing was not you.
Frisk nodded, hiccuped, rubbed his eyes with his sleeve. Sans removed his hand and stuck it in his pocket.
You want to quit? He asked. I could take you right back to Papyrus. We'll get everything on track.
Frisk gulped in air, steadied his voice. I don't think I can stop. Not now.
Don't ever tell yourself that. That kind of thinking is what really gets people hurt. You always have that choice, no matter what.
Frisk stayed silent, then rested his head against Sans' bony chest. Sans sighed, patted him on the back.
I don't totally agree with what you're doing here, it's true, he said, but I'm sticking with you just the same. You think I'd have agreed to this if I didn't believe you were in it for the right reasons?
For a while, Frisk didn't reply. Then, I want to keep going, Frisk said. His voice was slightly muffled by Sans' hoodie. Sans gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze.
Then let's move. Get you out of this wind before you get sick.
Frisk pushed away and pointed ahead, onward. Sans turned, walked for a bit, then stopped and turned again.
And Frisk, let me ask you something too. Do you think I'm a bad person?
Frisk shook his head so fiercely his hair whipped around his face.
You see?
His pupils dimmed.
Guess that means we'll just have to take each other's word for it.
Down and around the cliff, they entered a long tunnel that opened into a cave, where the only sound was a low, resonant hum like finger running over a water glass. Veins of exotic ore shimmered in the walls, staining everything a crystalline blue. In the cave's upper reaches, glides swam through the air in lazy circles, occasionally breaking that peaceful sound with his distant, mournful cry.
Haters gonna hate!
And at the back was a door, easily 10 feet wide and twice as tall, blue-gray like the sea, its edges marked with undecipherable symbols. Sans stopped just outside the tunnel's mouth, eyed that door, and then took out his notebook.
You been here before, kid?
He glanced aside to catch Frisk's nod.
Yeah, figured. Ever get this door open?
Frisk shook his head.
Figured that too. This thing's an enigma. There's an old legend that says it'll open to someone who shows extraordinary gratitude. But I don't exactly have time to bake it a birthday cake, so we're gonna try something a little less subtle today.
He flipped open the notebook.
I don't know where it goes normally, but for the next, about 16 minutes or so, I think, it'll lead somewhere else. It won't be in the underground. It won't be anywhere at all, empirically speaking, and that's where we'll find Gaster.
Frisk peeked around Sans and saw that the first several pages of the notebook were covered with tally marks. The pages were crinkled, torn, spotted with dried ketchup. After the tally, the next page was blank, save for a single sentence in its center, written in a sharp-edged print unlike Sans' usual loopy scribble. Is it raining somewhere else? As Sans flipped through the pages, Frisk saw other things. Graphs that seemed to feed into themselves, and equations that made his eyes water. Maps of places he thought he recognized, but with extra rooms. X's scratched into unfamiliar places. A sketch of Frisk himself. It was quite well drawn, with an X scribbled over his mouth, and underneath the scrawled words, "Don't trust him," with "don't" crossed out and "trust him" underlined. Several more pages were filled entirely with the letter G, written over and over again until the paper was nearly black with charcoal. 2 more pages contained only the words "Why not?" slashed into the paper with such force that it appeared Sans' pencil had snapped. Then, one variable at a time, the equations returned, and Sans started muttering to himself. Alright, let's see what we can see. Maximum 55 units, max indeterminate. That's good, that means I can redline it without worrying too much. Say 0.75 units per second, considering drop-off, then you factor in the KR effect. Maybe a minute and a half sustained? Yeah, go ahead and live dangerously. Sans replaced the notebook and stepped into the main cavern. He slowly rotated his head and shoulders. Various joints popped like firecrackers. Man, it's been a while. He looked over his shoulder. You want to see something cool? What Frisk saw nearly made him run out of the cave. He took a step back, then held his ground. Sans' eye burned. His right eye remained the same as ever, that dark hole with its white pinprick pupil. But now light blue and yellow flames licked around the left socket, and at its core was a solid sphere that printed a strobing circle of color on the far wall. Sans' immobile grin was bathed in that neon glare. Sans said, "Determination." Frisk crept closer to the flame. It gave no heat. You probably know by now that we monsters can't handle determination like humans can. Our souls don't generate it easily. Pump us full of the stuff and we just melt. But there's a theory. If a monster manages to become determined enough and hang around at that peak, the point just before their body falls apart, all sorts of neat stuff can happen. Frisk cautiously touched his own eye. Sorry, kiddo, but comparing your determination threshold to mine's like comparing Mount Ebot to an anthill. This trick is monster only. He turned back to the door. And besides, it's just a theory. I mean, I'm not determined. I'm just doing this to pass the time in between all your resets. I don't care about helping you at all. Sans' slipper scuffed across the ground. He raised one hand. It arrived without fanfare. Frisk blinked, and then it was hanging above Sans like it had been there all along, casting its grim silhouette on the ground below. Bone white, many-seamed, with ram horns curling across half its length. It resembled a DT extractor, that same ghostly goat skull. Its eyes and mouth were full of shadow. See how little I care? Sans flung his hand forward and the skull's eyes burned the same color as his own. Its jaw split along the seams 1, 2, 3, and erupted with a raging white beam of light that crackled like a dynamo and struck the door dead center. Frisk cringed and held both arms over his eyes, but the light was so bright it passed right through his flesh. He could almost see his bones and sinew like looking at an X-ray. And as the beam burned into the door, that cool blue color seemed to leach away from it, leaving the stone cold and gray. The color drained from the walls as well, leaving only symbols etched in blue. Astrological signs, open palms, squares, diamonds, knots, and crosses. Glide retreated so far up the cave that he nearly concussed himself on the ceiling. The commotion went on for almost 2 minutes, and when the beam finally died, and the skull winked out of reality once again, the whole cave had gone monochrome, save for the medley of symbols in the stones. Light spilled out from under the door, and with a great grinding of stone it swung open. On the other end was a solid wall of white. There, all done. He turned around, stared at Frisk, then reached out and gently closed his hanging jaw. Guess you enjoyed this show, huh? It was rad! Glide called. Thanks, dude. He held out his hand to Frisk. So, ready? Frisk waited a moment for his ears to stop ringing and the aggravating bluish glare to bleed out of his vision, and then nodded and took Sans' hand. Fair warning, kid, we're breaking some serious science here. All bets are off when we step through that door. Stick close to me. They approached that blinding light together. Their shadows grew and leapt until they were imprinted on the entire back wall of the cave. Silhouettes hand in hand. Then Sans stopped walking. One more thing. While we're baring our hearts to each other. He faced forward.
Dr. Gaster's my big brother.
Frisk said nothing.
Just, look, you don't owe me anything, but if you can, try to make this the last one, alright? I don't know what's gonna happen in there, but I don't want to forget it.
He felt pressure on his hand. Frisk had folded his own palm over it and squeezed it tight. He nodded up at Sans.
Appreciate it, Frisk.
They stepped over the threshold. The light consumed them. And several minutes later, the door rasped shut. Color bled back into the cave, and the symbols along the walls faded once again into anonymity.